Okay, good morning everyone. Thank you all for coming to our talk here at GDC. My name is Habib. I'm the CEO and founder of Steel City Interactive. So we're here to talk to you about Undisputed, our boxing game that's just launched into early access on Steam. So I guess first off, this is my first ever GDC. My first actual game event in general, so I'll probably screw up 2 or 3 times, but let's see how we go. So a little bit about us, our studio. So we're an independent studio based in Sheffield, England. We were founded just over 3 years ago. Myself and my 2 brothers, Asif and Asad. From a project that pretty much started out in a living room, our studio's grown to 50 members. And as I mentioned, we launched Undisputed into early access on January the 31st. One of the key points for us in the studio was some values that we really wanted to stick by. And one of those was innovation. And I think being a young startup, essentially, we really didn't have a ceiling in terms of what we wanted to accomplish. So innovation is something that we really drive and push through throughout the whole studio. And at the same time, I wanted to make it a fun and a dedicated environment, because I think those 2 things need to exist at the same time. And given the game that we're making, and I guess the size of the task that we had ahead of us, we were seen as a little underdog. And I think we embraced that badge, really. And I think it helped in the development, because I think early on, you know, here we are saying we're going to make a boxing game, and you know, we want licensed fighters, we want great visuals. I think it's a pretty tough sell when you don't really have a background in that space. So yeah, the underdog badge is something we've embraced. And another really important point in our studio was just the freedom to improve ourselves. And that's every single person in our team, in our studio, whether it's, you know, critical points with the game or even about the studio, where we just constantly strive to improve ourselves as a studio, and also the game. And I think, you know, my view was, once we've put those elements into place, it really gave us a good platform to engage with our community as well. So the passion shows through in the studio, and I think the community who we've brought along in the game, you know, on this journey, that passion exists in both spaces. And I think that's a really important point as well, with regards to, you know, the growth of our studio. So here's just a team photo outside our office in Sheffield. So yeah, it's still a little bit surreal for me, thinking that this just started out in a living room with my brothers. And yeah, we've got I'd like to think, a thriving family in the studio. So a little bit about myself. So as I said, no real experience in running a studio or a company for that matter. And absolutely 0 game development experience. So I still feel like an outsider here, really, because I'm sure there's way more people with a lot of really good experience in this room right now. But my background really was in the IT and infrastructure space, but mainly management, service management. And out of those roles that I've performed, I would probably say problem management is the most useful skill that I've brought into making a game, because yeah, we've come across quite a number of problems, to be fair. But having said that, I've been a massive gamer since the late 80s. Absolutely love playing games, and I love boxing, obviously as a fan, because I don't think I'd last more than 30 seconds in the ring, to be fair. So yeah, I think for me, those were my real two passions. Yeah, from that point, I was like, okay, let's try and do something. At this point, I'll introduce you to Ethan.
So I'm Ethan. I'm the senior gameplay programmer here at Stealth Interactive. I was the first programmer on the project. I was employee number 6, so I've had to deal with a lot of the mess that Ash has made with the prototypes. That we'll get into later. So I'm responsible for gameplay and tools. I was given the freedom to work on tools in the project, and I think that's down to like the company values we have of like allowing creativity. I'm also responsible for bringing my dog to work, as you saw in the company photo. So she comes every day and is basically employee number 7. So yeah, let's have a little look at what Undisputed is. I don't know if everybody knows, but we've got a little trailer here from what we had from early access launch. Oh, sorry.
There hasn't been a major boxing video game in over 10 years, and yet you think you're gonna come in here and dominate? Have you lost your mind? Do you have any idea what it takes to become undisputed?
It takes a right hand from hell.
Oh boy. Deontay Wilder.
With the crowd behind me.
It's Katie Taylor, perhaps the greatest athlete Ireland has ever produced.
Oh, what a shot!
With power in both hands.
A huge bomb from Crawford, and down he goes.
You think you can beat me? The great Roy Jones Jr.? Y'all must have forgot.
The Hall of Fame legend of boxing.
I got all the tools to make you miss.
With lightning speed.
Good job of cutting off the ring.
And looking good doing it.
Looks like he's going for the finish here. His opponent with his
Strength and power.
And no one moves like Alexander Usyk.
You'll never beat me, you dosser. I'm the Gypsy King.
Become
undisputed.
It's over, baby.
Saúl Canelo Álvarez.
¿Crees que puedes ganarme? Trata.
Early access trailer. And yeah, something that I think everybody in the studio is just really proud of in terms of what we've been able to accomplish. So yeah, hope you enjoyed that little piece. So I guess the next part really is just talking about the journey that we've been on and some information about what we've created and what our plan was in terms of the kind of game we wanted to create. So that I felt was something really important in terms of very early on deciding what exactly we wanted to achieve here, no matter how crazy it sounded back in the early days, because it was a pretty crazy task. So first off, we wanted to create an authentic boxing game that literally meant visuals where we wanted to have lifelike characters, whether they are scans or whether they are sculpts for fighters no longer with us. So, we partnered with a studio called 1024 who specialize in scans, and I guess some things work out. I'm not going to call it fate, but looking for a scan studio in the UK. I thought maybe a difficult task, and one happened to be 5 minutes from where I live. So that was pretty handy with the 1024 guys being around the corner. But yeah, again, as part of creating an authentic boxing game, we wanted to have real punches in terms of not just a case of getting to the center of the ring and just trading shots, but we really wanted to get into the technical aspect of creating an authentic game. So over 60 individual punches, which our animators absolutely loved when they heard that. And then a really in-depth footwork system. So being a combat sports fan, I wanted Undisputed to really emphasize on the technical aspects of boxing, where I didn't want it to feel like the characters float across the floor and you're able to just instantly move in different directions. So we put emphasis on being able to shift weight from the front foot to the back foot, So again, there were a few things that we really wanted to try and nail, and this really feeds into the innovation side in the studio, because I think a lot of the guys in the studio were like, well, we've never really done this before, or even attempted to do them in other games, but we didn't really let that stop us. And again, at the same time, creating an authentic game, it had to have physics, right? So it was a bit of a challenge, because once you have almost hyper-realistic characters with scans, anything that looks unnatural really stands out more. So physics was something that was incredibly important to us. And if you're a boxing fan, then you want the big names. So we have a pretty huge roster, going right from the beginning in terms of Jack Johnson, Jack Dempsey, right through to Rocky Marciano, Muhammad Ali, through to the current stars such as Tyson Fury, Ryan Garcia. And at the same time, my view was, well, we don't want to just stop at signing hundreds of fighters. I want to bring the whole world of boxing into this project. So we have a fully fledged women's division, along with governing bodies such as the WBC, through to partners like CompuBox, who deal with all the punch stats on the televised fights, and also trainers, cutmen, promoters. So again, the vision here wasn't just about creating a boxing game where it's just about the fighters. It's all about essentially everything that exists in boxing. So that's what the vision was. And the goal here really is doing justice to the sport, because as a big gamer and a big boxing fan, I felt like boxing had just been left out in the cold for a number of years. So for me, I wanted to make it a personal goal of trying to do justice to the sport, and also, again, personally being a huge fan of Muhammad Ali, just creating a game where we're able to put all these things together to bring somebody like Ali to life, and then hearing the feedback from Ali's family about what we've done with the game, and being able to recreate his likeness is something that everyone at the studio's really proud of. And here's just a little clip in terms of how Ali looks in Undisputed.
You can't imagine how bad these fighters want to get their hands on each other.
So yeah, I'm not sure how many Ali fans are in this room, but to me, it was really important to try and capture those mannerisms, the swag that he had in the ring. And we've tried to do that for a number of fighters in the game who have very unique styles. So again, just as a boxing fan, that was something that was really important to me. And yeah, going on to how we created Undisputed. And again, it was a case of my eldest brother Asif calling me one evening and said, "Ash, let's try and do something with boxing." For years we kept saying, why isn't there a boxing game, a mainstream boxing game out that we could play? And we just started it off as a little side project. And obviously I had zero experience in game development. So the first thing that I did was literally go into Google and just typed in what's the best game engine to use. So there were a couple of suggestions that came up, and I went with Unity. I just felt it was the best choice for me. And I literally just got hooked on the whole aspect, everything from learning really basic code that Ethan's probably laughing at, really, through to animation, some art, and really utilizing the tutorials that were available, and the asset store. So that continued for a number of weeks, up until the point where we were able to create a little concept. And I think the thing that still surprises me is the fact that from the very first moment of downloading Unity, we've just continued right through to early access launch in terms of converting a concept into a launched title. And yeah, that's something that I just found pretty interesting, considering you can literally start from Googling what game engine to use, and you end up talking at GDC a few years later. So yeah, I mean, even with the concept that we managed to create in a few weeks, I thought we had some pretty decent results. So that was like back in February 2020. And yeah, we created the test concept, and if there's any animators in this room, I'd probably say look away now, because that was my animation tree, and it made perfect sense to me, because on one hand, I had no idea what I was doing, but it all worked. So yeah, that's basically how not to use an animation tree. I mean, I don't even need the text in there, really, to be fair. But yeah, Ethan had fun when he joined and said, what have I come into? But yeah, I think it's just the energy and the passion that we had at the studio when we started this game, where we were just doing crazy things and seeing how far we could go. And yeah, again, after like maybe 4 or 5 weeks of from the point of Googling how to use Unity, that's pretty much what I put together with my brothers and a friend. So yeah, this was just a very early, what can we do? So at that point, I thought, well, if this has taken 5 or 6 weeks from not knowing anything about Unity to doing that, I thought, well, making games is easy. So yeah, that was a bit of a silly view that I had 3 years ago. But yeah, I think, personally speaking, I think it's just a testament to everybody who's been involved in Unity in creating an engine that allows somebody like me to come and, start something like this. So yeah, that was a really great experience. I'll now hand you over to Ethan, who's going to take you through some of the other features we've used.
Yeah, so when I joined, I saw that little animator mechanism set up, and I was like, oh, this is a mess. I need to go here, just like fix it. And I took like a day to organize it a bit better, and I showed it to Ash, and he was like, oh, it actually makes sense now. And I was like, yeah, well, that's what happens when you have a bit of organization time. But yeah, so I'm going to be going over some of the Unity features that we have in our project, and then afterwards I'm going to be talking about some of the tools we created, just so you can have some ideas about tools that maybe you could use in your own project. So yeah, let's start with some of the features we used. So I've got 5 features that I'm going to talk about. The first one's HDRP, timelines, Cinemachine, Addressables, and then finally Scriptable Objects. So as you can tell from the visual quality of our game, we used HDRP. And what is HDRP? It's a high-fidelity scriptable render pipeline. So the way I like to see it as a programmer is it makes the things look better than I could make it look. So yeah, a key example for that is we used it for our skin. So we partnered with 1024, as Ash has said, and they would scan boxes in, and then we utilized some a shader graph, custom shader we made in shader graph to create our skin shader. With a bit of help from Unity, we managed to get the skin looking pretty great. I mean, as you can tell from like some of these tattoos coming through, like as lifelike as possible, it really helped make the game feel as authentic as possible to boxing. So yeah, here's another tattooed boxer. This is Deontay Wilder. I really like how you can really make out his tattoos fully. Just kind of sells the game perfectly. The next thing we used HDRP for is our damage system. So we needed a way to really, when you're fighting in boxing, there's always going to be some chance of getting hurt, and we need to really sell that to the player. So we created a system in our shader graph for having dynamic cuts throughout the fight with bruising and swelling as well. So we used some nodes in shader graph and also some blend shapes on our mesh renderer to add in some swelling. So here you can see a level 1 cut on our Toragati, and then as we progress through the fight, It goes to a level 2 with some blood appearing. And then finally, level 3 is a full-on swelling with a bit on the nose. And the thing that I like the most that our technical artist added in was some of this blood around the chest area. Just sort of like, the blood sort of splurts out of your cut. It makes it a bit more gruesome, but a bit more realistic and authentic. So yeah, finally, we use volumes. I mean, volumes kind of like help bring your game to life really with HDRP. I really like this venue. This is one you can play on our booth today. It's Technicolor Gym. Sort of adds that very futuristic gym vibe. This is probably one of my favorite screenshots in the game, just from like how the volumetrics work for the fog. This is Brooklyn Hall, and then here's another of our Brooklyn Hall. Yeah, and this is one of our arenas. This is WBC arena. The thing that I really like about this is like the depth of field to really add to the atmosphere of a big venue, and some of the bokeh events, bokeh from the lights is really, really nice. So here's a close-up of some depth of field with Tyson Fury fighting Deontay Wilder. So yeah, there's a bit of advice here with HDRP. We ran into some issues early on where we were having massive FPS drops when we were changing volumes, and it was a bit of a silly mistake. We spoke to Unity about it, and they managed to figure out what the problem was. So we were changing our quality setting on depth of field from custom to a preset, and when you do that, the calculations are terrible. Like you'll have like a down to 10 FPS drop. So the simple solution is to create quality presets in your HDRP settings, so that way you can set up those settings that way. So yeah, it saved us a lot of headache with the FPS drops. So yeah, just to recap, we created our own custom shader and shader graph. We then enhanced our cinematics with volumetric events, volume effects, as we'll get into in a bit future slide. And then we created real-time lighting setups for our venues. So we used a combination of real-time lights and light probe groups, and we're currently looking at transitioning to more light probe groups for our different cinematics as well, just to increase performance as much as possible. So yeah, next section is timelines. So you generally use timelines when you're trying to create cutscenes in your game. And we need to use them in various ways because we want to be as authentic to boxing as possible. So here's a little video of our announcer timeline.
12 rounds of boxing. In the red corner, an Olympic bronze medalist from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, a hard-hitting, sensational knockout artist, and a WBC heavyweight champion of the world, the bronze bomber, Deontay Wilder. Fighting out of the blue corner from Manchester, England, and standing at 6 feet 9 inches, here is a sensational heavyweight champion of the world, known as the Gypsy King, Tyson Fury.
Yeah, so with that timeline, we had to make sure that we could bring in any character into it. So all of the animations are set up so that way we can have different height boxes. Because we have we have Tyson Fury, which is 6'9", but then we also have smaller boxes in our game. The cornermen in the corners are also dynamically loaded in, so that way we could have a different coach and a different cutman for the different boxes. We used F-mod for our audio system, so we had to tie in event triggers to make it so that not everybody's announcement is the same length, so we had to be able to cut and jump to the different sections in the timeline. So another timeline we have is our recovery timeline. So this generally plays at the end of a round. You'll have a little chat with your coach and your cutman to give you some advice on the next round.
Boxing judging can be sometimes. There's no doubt who won that one. I seriously hope the judges kept their eye on this fight, because if they haven't, there's going to be absolute uproar.
So yeah, again, this is another one where we have to have all the different boxes be able to be used inside this timeline. So some of the ways we use it obviously is by using cutscenes for our timelines. We have about 10 different in-fight cutscenes, each which vary per venue depending on how the venue is set up. We had to create scripts, to be able to change the boxes and the NPCs that appear in those timelines. And then we also incorporated Cinemachine for auto-targeting of cameras. So we wrote a bit of code for our project so that way when an artist is creating a timeline, they can set up different rigs within that timeline so they auto-target to the boxer. So yeah, it's just a little helper class that we made. So next, let's talk about Cinemachine, because we talked about timelines. Cinemachine is great. It's a procedural camera system. It allows us to create camera systems with minimal code. So how do we use it? As you saw previously, we did cinematic cutscenes with the help of timeline. And we also use it for our in-fight camera system. So it helps us to transition between different fight states within the fight. So here's an example of Deontay Wilder hitting Tyson Fury into the dazed state. And you'll notice how when he gets hit into that dazed state, the camera will zoom in onto him to show that he's in danger. We like to encroach upon the opponent to show that they're like close to being knocked out. So yeah, we also used it for camera effects. So we used stuff like Dutch tilt and the impulse listeners. This allowed us to have like different camera shake and different amounts of reactions to different elements within the game. So this video shows me trying to get like a counter off on Tyson Fury. So when I dodge the punch, you'll see that the camera sort of tilts towards me to say, hey, you've got the counter window open. And when the counter hit lands back, the camera will tilt back to the opponent. And the camera shake will change depending on what punch has landed and the force behind that punch. So when you throw a power punch, the camera will shake slightly more. And if you do an uppercut, it will shake slightly less without power. So yeah, there's simple ways of using Cinemachine that can really add like a lot of juice elements to your game. These next sections are a bit more techy and a bit less visual, but they're key to making our game run how it does. So we use the Addressables system. Addressables, is an asset management system. It allows for us to asynchronously load assets in, so we're not holding the main thread up. So how do we use them? Well, we created asset groups for a lot of our stuff. So each venue has its own asset group. Each boxer has its own asset group, and each NPC also has its own asset group. This allows us to remove boxers and venues from the build just by unticking the include and build section here. So yeah, we created groups for each of our assets. We implemented tools because when an artist has to do this, they get a bit confused sometimes. So we made it easier for them by having it incorporated into the tools, which I'll show you a bit later. And yeah, so this allowed us to load in any asset that could change between sessions. So the key ones obviously are the boxes. And finally, we'll talk about scriptable objects for a bit. So scriptable objects is a great way for storing data in your project. It's as simple as deriving from scriptable object to use it. There's the simple of inheritance. Here you can see we use it for our punch stats, which is a scriptable object that Ash can easily change. And yeah, so we use it within our project quite a lot. Each of our boxes is a scriptable object. So that way we can have boxes inside different weight classes. We also have traits. So each boxer can have a trait. Or up to 3 traits available. And this is all set up so that way the code is already available and the designers can go and adjust different traits to how they want the game to play. Finally, this one's unfortunately blurred out because my boss didn't like me showing these stats, but this is a punch stat, so it has data like the damage, the stamina, and some of the flash knockdown and flash daze chances. So yeah, when we were doing this project originally, we were in a database system, and as we grew as a company, it got to a point where we were just having constant merge conflicts on that database. So we decided to do, like in September last year, right before launch, not the greatest idea, but we changed to a scriptable object system. So that way we would never really have any conflicts anymore. We had a bit of fight about it with some of our team, but in general, everyone seemed to agree with it in the end. So yeah, the key reasoning was so that designers could edit their values easier without having to use stuff like DB browser or stuff like that. So yeah, and yeah, easy way to store references. For example, on our boxer, we can have images set up so we can use them within the different areas of the game. So yeah, that's the overview of some of the features we've used in Unity. Obviously, these are like the key ones. We have used a lot more. It's not just these 5. But there's not really a lot of detail we can go into with the other ones. So yeah, now that we've had a look at Unity's features, I'm going to talk to you about how we expanded Unity. We had a lot of issues along the way that we had to solve to increase our workflows. So the areas we're going to talk about are prefabs, animations, and stats. So let's start with prefabs. So as you all may know, in Unity we use prefabs are a concept, and we use them quite a lot. In this screenshot here, each of these elements are a prefab. Our crowd, thankfully, isn't. It's all driven through a shader. But yeah, we needed a way to create these prefabs and update these prefabs. So for creating prefabs, what's the problem? Well, when I first started at Steel City Interactive, I saw the art director manually adding components to the box of prefabs and setting them up themselves. So I was like, what are you doing? Like, there's so many components here. You should be automating this. And he was like, oh, I didn't know you could automate it. So one of my first things that I did at the company was create a little tool to set up a boxer. So this is a bit more complex to it, but the idea is you can bring in a rig and you can name the boxer and give it some stats, and then you can also set up its default materials. As you can see here, we also have our addressable setup, so that way the artists are setting up which materials and which textures should be included in the addressable group, as well as setting up their animations. So you can say which moveset and which southpaw moveset they use, as well as what block type. We decided also to have the same sort of thing for our NPCs because we use a lot of licensed cornermen and cutmen and so on and so forth. So we just took a simplified version of our boxer setup and created this tool here. Now, the UX isn't great, but it does the job for us, which we need. So just to recap, it allowed us to streamline our workflows just by automating as much as possible. We could unify how we add new components to the boxes because we can just go into those tools and add a component to that. And it just saves us time. Like, there's a lot less time spent faffing around trying to get all the components in the right order and so on and so forth. With the help of the boxer tool, we also managed to get some good inheritance going with our prefabs. So we created a main menu rig and a fight rig as well. So that way we could use the main menu rig wherever we don't need to use fight components. So yeah, now we've got all our prefabs made. Throughout development, you sometimes change something. You need to update that prefab. And I don't want to manually go through and update 50-odd boxes at a time because I don't like to do stuff manually. I want to automate it. So thankfully, one of our coders created this little function here, which basically applies to all of our prefabs in the game. So the idea is you can specify a location of where the assets are and loop through and apply a function. So in this example, we're resetting our boxer visuals class because maybe something has changed, maybe some damage has been added. And we can just literally create a little tool from the tools menu and run it on every boxer. So again, this is just about saving time where we can, and depending on the complexity of the task, we can save anywhere between 5 to 30 minutes. So yeah, let's talk about animations. But before we do, let's have a look at some of the animations in our game. So I really like that animation just because of the way Tyson Fury, it's like mouth guard comes out of his mouth. We like to sell a lot of juice elements in our game just to sort of make it feel a bit more impactful. So as you saw earlier with that animator graph, that was like our version 1 of animations. When I joined, they were looking at doing some motion matching system, and I had to figure out a way of making it work in our project. Once we had it working, we had 2 issues. We needed to create punches in our games, and we needed to create movesets. So I was given some time to work on some tools to make it easier to bring those elements in. So yeah, what's the problem? Setting up a punch in our game is complex. We have a lot of small elements in our game, like animation events, animation curves, and so on and so forth, and we need to be able to organize those punches into certain areas. So what's the solution? Well, excuse me, I had to Alt-Tab because the GIF doesn't work on this, but yeah. So the solution is we created a little tool where you could drag in an animation clip, and you could preview that animation clip. So the animation preview part of this was one of the most complex things I've ever done in our project. Like figuring out a way to actually use Unity's own UI system for animation preview was just like, I was just so happy, and I was like ecstatic to all the programmers, and they're like, what, this is insane. So yeah, it was a great experience. So yeah, here we can preview our punch. We can, there's 2 timelines on this, so that way we can preview where the animation events are as well. And when you process a punch through this, it gets added to an asset file. This way we can organize our punches into different types and targets. So yeah, let me just Alt-Tab back. So yeah, the outcome is now I'm not setting up the punches myself. Before, it took me anywhere from 30 minutes to 60 minutes to set up some punches, but now an animator can go in and they can create a punch in 5 minutes and have it in the game. So over the course of development so far, we saved probably 5 months of development time, which obviously as a small team is very beneficial. So we have all those punches now in asset files, and we need a way to create a moveset based on that. So what we did is we created a tool, basically a custom editor GUI window. I really like making custom editor windows. It's kind of my jam. And it basically makes it easier for non-coders and non-Unity natives to use. Unfortunately, I can't show a picture of it because it shows some NDA information, but you just have to use your imagination. It's basically a bunch of drop-downs where you can select from different animation clips, and you can preview those animation clips, so that way you can create your entire moveset. So this allowed us to create, for other departments to create movesets. So now even Ash can go in and create his own moveset if he wants to. And so more movesets created equals more content, which is obviously great for the game. And again, this saves us a massive amount of time in development. When I was creating the punch tool, I realized I needed this moveset tool, so they kind of go hand in hand and work pretty well together. So yeah, that's our animations tools. So there are a lot more animation tools that I have made, but a lot of them are just simple tools, assign this to a specific thing or whatever. So they're not really worthy of a presentation preview. So yeah, the final section we're going to talk about is stats. So, scriptable objects, we have a lot of them, over 150, just base scriptable objects. But yeah, we need easy solutions for both balancing and comparing stats. So let's have a look at box and stat balancing. So the problem is you can't do stat comparison between different boxes. So I have, this guy called box here. I can't really show too much information, but we have our stats down here, like chin resistance, body resistance. But the only way to compare those two scriptable objects is by creating 2 inspector windows, which isn't great UX workflow, and Ash doesn't really like doing that, so I had to create a good solution to make it work better. So what we did is we created a custom editor window. I love editor windows. And basically, I can select a number of boxes I want to compare. I can go through their weight classes and assign them to comparison. And then this allows me to create stats based on comparison. So for example, we have like Canelo in 2 weight classes, and we want to make sure those 2 stats don't differentiate from each other too much. There should be some stat variance, but not too much stat variance. And it helps us go, like, if we're looking at the heavyweight class, we can be like, okay, do all their punch speeds sort of match up how we want them to? And if they do, then great. If they don't, then we can just edit that quite quickly through that tool. So yeah, the outcome is, we saved a fair amount of balancing time. There's less switching between assets. We just use one editor tool window. And now Ash can go in and compare boxer stats very quickly and get the balancing task done. Because his time is precious, my time is precious. We want to get stuff out the window as quick as possible. So yeah, the final section is fight stat balancing. So again, unfortunately, I can't show you the stats, but you can just imagine what is there. We have like damage, we have stamina, and so on and so forth. So again, comparison isn't easy to do with this type of scriptable object. Now, this was some custom UI I'd made beforehand, but I realized that it wasn't the best. So always being able to go back and work on stuff that you've already worked on is great. And our company is about improving ourselves as much as possible. So the solution, I can't show you the stat names, but you can see the values. So we can now compare if the values look the same. We can show animation curves within here to compare the curves. And again, it just makes life so much easier for comparison. We have like damage sets for different types of game modes. So we have simulation and we have casual. So being able to compare the stats across casual and across simulation makes it so much easier for Ash. Again, less time spent doing a task means more time for Ash to do other stuff. He doesn't need to worry about balancing forever. And time is saved along the way, which is great. So now that I've talked about some of the tools, I want to kind of give you some tips and tricks for creating your own tools in your own project. So we're going to just go into that now. So the first mentality I have when making anything is if I'm doing it more than twice, I'll automate it. I don't want to be there pressing buttons forever. I've got other things to do. So I'll rather spend an extra hour making a script instead, so that way I never have to do it again. The next thing I'd say is limit the amount of clicks you have to do to get to your tools. So we found some pretty cool GitHub repos for creating this toolbar selection. So some of the tools we have in here is being able to switch between our different scenes quite easily. We can also go to our animation setup and our moveset creator tools, as well as going to our boxer renderer, because we like to render everything within the engine. So yeah. There's a couple of links here on the slide. I don't know if people are interested in it, but they basically link to the toolbar extender as well as the editor icons, because figuring out which icon is for which element, it takes a bit of time, but they've made a simple list on their GitHub page for that. So yeah, another thing we ran into is with the stat balancing stuff, you'd obviously run into issues where if Ash made the stat slightly incorrect and pressed Control Z and he couldn't undo stuff, there's a bit of an issue there. Because with stuff like boxes, we're editing the raw scriptable object. So what I did is I created a bunch of helper classes to go through and add stuff like int sliders to be recorded. So here's an example of me setting up a function for recording the int sliders. I did the same thing for stuff like string fields and int fields, just so that way if we ever have to undo stuff, it's as easy as pressing Control Z. So yeah, along the way of doing our animation setup, we decided to, we switched from using Mechanim to a motion matching system, and I needed to go through every animation in our project and rename something slightly so that it would work in the new system. So the way we got around that was by creating a little script using the asset post-processor, and basically we can use a model importer to go through every animation in our project and slightly change their events and their curves. So this is useful if you're early on in the project, but I would not recommend doing it if you're near the end, because what it does, it will re-import every single animation in your project. So suddenly someone has like a 2-hour import time instead of like their expected 10 seconds. So the final thing I'm going to say is, organizing your GUI for the editor is super helpful. Being able to like collapse and expand stuff is great. So it's as simple as creating a Boolean variable that you just assign a foldout to, and as you saw earlier with the animation setup tool, it allowed us to create different sections within that. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the talk. It was mainly around trying to show you what we used in Undisputed within Unity, just to sort of sell the authentic boxing experience. So yeah, you can come to the booth at Unity, where one of the games on show. If you want to come play the game, come chat about the game there. If you have any questions, feel free to go to the mic now, and we'll try our best to answer them. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for that talk. It was great.
No worries.
You guys had some really great boxer models, but I was looking past them at your crowds. I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about how that crowd shader came together.
Yeah, so we created our original one. It was not very performant, and we managed to have a project review from Unity, and they came in and they completely rewrote it for us. So thankfully, it's great having that sort of support. I'm pretty sure it's a compute shader that we use, and then we record our animations into a texture file, so that way you can play it back from the textures. There is some chat about changing it again to make it even more performant, but I can't really go too much into it.
Awesome, thank you.
No worries. Cool. Is there any other questions? If not, that's cool.
So sometimes I feel like the difficulty with using Unity is because they have new systems and stuff. So like, you guys use the input system, and do you try to do, how do you balance kind of looking at some of their new systems that are coming along and things like that?
Okay, so the way we approach it is like, if there's enough features in a new version of Unity, we'll generally try and upgrade. We did upgrade twice within our project so far. We're planning to upgrade again. We went from 2019 to 2020, and that was quite a painful process, but getting the upgrades meant that we had longer term support. So yeah, like we actually, when we started, we used an asset store plugin for our input, and we actually did go to the new input system. But we kind of like faked it because we didn't actually use a lot of the input system stuff. We created our input system on top of the input system. So it's a bit harder to upgrade with stuff like that. But there are stuff like, dynamic resolution is a key one for us. Our current version of Unity doesn't have it, so we're looking to upgrade to get a version that does have it. Yeah.
One other thing too is I find sometimes the scene management could be kind of difficult. So do you guys just have one scene, and how do you manage your scenes?
So actually in that, the tip section, let me just go back to it. So this up here, this little section, that's a little tool that we created so that you could easily switch between scenes. So everybody in the project isn't like searching the scenes folder. They add the scenes to that list. It's a little scriptable object, and then they could just click that drop down and go to the scenes. So each of our venues is a different scene, and then we have a main menu scene as well as a scene loader scene that will load into those different scenes.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I thought I had one more question on there. Oh yeah. So like as far as like source control, sometimes the issue could be trouncing on other people's stuff. You know, and that's why I'm wondering, like, keeping things as prefabs and then just kind of loading those things into the scene, so people could work on the prefab rather than working on the, dealing with the main scene. It's very easy to kind of like, kind of break things. How do you handle that?
We have a combination, right? So we have some things that are done in the scene and some things that are prefabs. Like all of our timeline setups are prefabbed. It is a bit harder to copy a prefab over. We have to create some custom editor scripts to make it bind correctly. But yeah, it made sure that like our cinematics team didn't have to encroach on the environment art team, and they could work simultaneously on the same thing.
And are you guys using like GitHub or Perforce?
We use Plastics SEM.
Okay, Plastics.
It's okay.
Great, thank you.
Cheers.
Hello.
Hi.
My question is about how you actually got, or how easy it is to get those big names like Tyson Fury and Canelo and stuff like that. Because I know there's a lot of controversy within, I follow more like the UFC and MMA side of things. So I know within like UFC 4 and stuff, there's like some controversy with like which fighters get to be in the game and that type of stuff. So I was wondering like how you guys went about it.
With a lot of the boxes, so first of all, the sport of boxing doesn't work like soccer or basketball, where you have the NBA that looks after all the basketball licenses. So, in those early days, it was a pretty tall order because, being transparent about the process. Let's say I go to a very, very high top-rated boxer, and we say, hey, we're making a boxing game here. And if you can imagine how that conversation goes, where, okay, we've seen the quality of other games out there. What games have you made before? And it's like, well, kind of our first game. So, okay, what's your budget like? It's like, I don't really have one. So going through that process in those early days was a very difficult task. But we didn't let that, stop us, right? So it was a process that we took in steps. But having said that, the boxing community, the boxers themselves, have all really got behind the game because it's in everybody's interests, the boxers' interests as well, to try and get boxing back into gaming. So literally everybody from Tyson Fury through to Canelo through to all these superstars that me as a boxing fan, or even fighters that I grew up watching like Mickey Ward. And Johnny Nelson and Carl Froch, it started getting easier because they all rallied around the game, and the relationship we've got with the boxers isn't one of a licensee and a licensor. It's a real relationship where they feel part of the game, and it's why we have boxers coming into the studio all the time, whether it's to do motion capture or helping us technically. So. Yeah, there's been some very difficult times when it's really difficult to get licensed people into the game. But I think once we set out our stall and what we were about, I think they saw that, and we actually invited them to come to the studio and play the game for themselves before even entering into any kind of contractual discussions. So I think that was the important thing for me, that they saw the passion behind the studio, they saw our motivation and the reasons why we wanted to make a game. And I think once they saw that we weren't some suits behind a boardroom, I think they really got on board with the game.
Okay. Was there any like difficulty like with different fight promotions and like the likeness and the legal aspect of it, or was it like fairly smooth with like the fighters?
I think when we partnered with 1024, that really helped that perception of, you know, these guys are a bunch of nobodies in Sheffield, never heard of them. And when we started showing them like what we were capable of with, you know, with 1024, the things I spoke about, like our movement system, I think that's what really brought them around to that idea. So, you know, in terms of you know, the legal aspects and the agents, I think again, what was important was they saw, you know, the reasons why we were doing things, and I think, you know, it made that road for us pretty easy.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, I think, oh, yeah. Any more? I think we're good. Yep. Okay, well, thank you all for attending this talk. I'm hoping, yeah, you found some of the information in there useful. So yeah, great, thank you.